This is not just a story about buses. It is the beginning of a quiet transformation that many thought impossible. In the heart of West Africa, without foreign aid, without imported parts, and without the attention of the global press, Burkina Faso accomplished something that even wealthier nations struggled to do. It built 500 fully electric buses from scratch. No containers arrived at its ports, no foreign technicians guided the process, and no Made in China labels were stamped on the side. Instead, every single component was designed, assembled, and perfected on Burkinabé soil by its own people. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe so you do not miss the next parts of this powerful journey. What follows is more than an engineering success. It is a national statement. We do not need to wait for the world. We can build our own future. While many African nations still rely on assembling foreign-designed vehicles in the name of industrial development, Burkina Faso broke from that illusion and went straight to creating a full-scale, independent manufacturing reality. The driving force behind this transformation is the UA 2000 Industrial Corridor. Once a symbol of half-finished projects and lost opportunity, it has now become the beating heart of a new era. Within its walls, young engineers, many barely in their 20s, collaborated with artisans and electrical specialists to construct a vehicle adapted not to foreign roads but to the very conditions of their country. These were not elites educated overseas. They were trained in Burkina Faso's own vocational schools and technical centers, young people who knew firsthand the problems they needed to solve. Intense heat, poor road conditions, unreliable power, and tight budgets. What they lacked in international experience, they compensated with a deep understanding of local needs. They did not try to copy a Western bus. They asked what a bus should be for their environment, and then they built it. The outcome was remarkable. A bus that runs silently over cracked roads, uses no diesel, emits no pollution, and costs a fraction of what traditional fuel-powered vehicles demand to maintain. But the true miracle is not only the machine itself, it is what they did not require to achieve it. No loans from the IMF, no consultants from the World Bank, no technology transfer agreements signed under pressure. Where others waited years for foreign partnerships and feasibility studies, Burkina Faso simply moved forward. The government took a political risk, ignored the warnings of foreign advisors, and trusted its own people. Funding came from internal revenues. Facilities were built locally. Teams were empowered to test, fail, improve, and succeed without interference. What emerged was not just a bus, but a declaration and a message to the continent and the world that progress does not require permission. And this is only the beginning. Once you create the machine, the next question becomes, how do you keep it running in a country where electricity is unreliable and fuel prices can spiral overnight? How do you power 500 electric buses every day without destroying the very land you are trying to preserve? The answer would not be found in diesel or oil. It would be found overhead, waiting patiently, constant and abundant. But that is for the next part. For now, consider this. A nation once dismissed as too poor and too dependent just built what others could only imagine. This project was not launched with international fanfare. It was born in silence, in determination, and in the hands of ordinary citizens who refused to accept limitations. If they could do it, who else might follow? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Should more nations take the same path? Can they? And if you believe in a future where African solutions are built by African hands, subscribe now so you don't miss what comes next. After building the machines, the next question became not one of mechanics, but of energy. How do you keep 500 electric buses moving every single day in a country where electricity can vanish in the blink of an eye, where diesel prices can spiral out of reach overnight, and where energy dependency has historically kept progress shackled to foreign suppliers? Burkina Faso did not turn to oil. It did not plead for coal or even depend on a shaky national power grid. Instead, it looked upward and found the answer that had always been there: the sun. The country harnessed its most reliable and underutilized resource, solar energy, and in doing so created an entirely new energy model, one built on self-reliance, sustainability, and local expertise. But it wasn't just about slapping solar panels onto rooftops. This was a full transformation. Burkina Faso built a decentralized solar charging infrastructure specifically engineered for its fleet of electric buses. These were not imported systems dependent on Western consultants. These were designed by Burkinabé engineers who understood not just solar technology, but how to deploy it in dusty, rural, and urban environments where global models often fail. Each bus in the Itoe fleet can travel up to 330 kilometers on a single charge, a feat impressive on its own. But more incredible is how fast they can be recharged. In just 30 minutes, a completely depleted battery is brought back to full power through advanced solar stations strategically installed across key transportation hubs. That means no lines at fuel stations, no reliance on unstable national grids, and no waiting for hours just to get back on the road. Instead, it's a closed, clean cycle, sunlight captured, converted, stored, and transferred, all within Burkina Faso's borders. What many miss is how revolutionary this is for local economies. Transport operators who once spent a significant portion of their income on fuel now report massive savings. These savings do not disappear into foreign accounts. They return to local families, businesses, and neighborhoods, creating ripple effects throughout the economy. Maintenance costs have dropped dramatically too, since electric motors have fewer moving parts and experience far less mechanical stress than traditional diesel engines. Then there is the environmental impact. The air in Ouagadougou, once thick with the stench of diesel exhaust, is clearer. Noise in the city's chaotic intersections has softened. The streets feel different, not just cleaner, but calmer. And in that calm lies something powerful, a shift in public psychology. When people see their environment improving not through foreign aid or international pressure, but through local effort and innovation, they begin to believe in their own capacity. But what truly sets this apart is the way Burkina Faso has completely sidestepped the old colonial energy models. While much of the continent remains tied to outdated systems and external control, this country is building a new ecosystem, one where public transportation is powered not by fuel that must be imported, but by sunlight that belongs to everyone. The administration behind this transformation had already been investing in rural solar independence, and now that expertise has been pulled into the heart of the city. Microgrids have been linked directly to transport corridors, creating a secondary energy system that operates independently of the national grid. If the central power supply fails, buses still run. If fuel prices skyrocket, nothing changes. That resilience is not just technical, it is political. Because once a country learns to power its movement without foreign approval, it begins to challenge the very structures that once defined its place in the global order. Burkina Faso now powers its transport system with the same freedom it built it, without asking for permission. And this has not gone unnoticed. The silent solar revolution taking place is now catching the attention of policymakers, engineers, and ordinary citizens across Africa. There is a growing realization that this is not just about transport, it is about sovereignty, about pride, about what happens when a people decide to move forward using only what they already have. This is not a test program or a pilot project funded by external donors. It is a living, breathing example of a functioning, full-scale solar-powered transport system built entirely by and for the Burkinabé people. And yet, this too is just the beginning, because once you build the machines and once you power them independently, the next question arises: can you make them intelligent? Can you integrate them into a modern digital system that doesn't just move people, but moves data, anticipates needs, and responds in real time? That is the next frontier. And as we will see next, Burkina Faso is already there. Do you think this kind of solar-powered public transport could work in your country? Leave a comment and let us know. And if you believe in Africa's right to lead its own energy future, subscribe now to continue following this groundbreaking story. They had built the buses. They had powered them with the sun. But in the modern world, movement without intelligence is only half the solution. True transformation means more than just wheels turning. It requires information, data that flows as freely as the vehicles themselves. In Burkina Faso, the electric bus project did not stop at motion and energy. It entered the digital age with confidence and clarity, turning every bus not just into a vehicle, but into a smart machine. Each Itoe electric bus was embedded with an intelligent operating system. This wasn't simply GPS or location tracking. It was a fully integrated data infrastructure that connected every bus to a central network. Every stop, every movement, every idle moment, even the wear on internal components, was monitored and optimized in real time. This digital backbone formed the architecture of a wider vision quietly unfolding under the leadership of President Traoré, a vision known internally as Smart Burkina. It was more than just a slogan. It was a strategy to convert public transportation into a living, breathing, thinking ecosystem. Passengers began to feel the change almost immediately, where once they waited blindly under the burning sun, unsure when or if the next bus would arrive, now they could check in real time where the nearest bus was, how full it was, and how soon it would reach them. The frustration of uncertainty was replaced with the peace of predictability. Behind the scenes, the data collected by the buses was even more powerful. Urban planners began using it to identify pain points in the city. Which intersections experienced the most congestion? Where were buses consistently delayed? Which routes needed redesigning? The buses were, without exaggeration, drawing a new map of the city every single day. They did not just serve passengers. They became mobile sensors, reading the pulse of the city with every journey. This real-time feedback loop allowed for constant improvement. Traffic bottlenecks were resolved faster. Resources were deployed more effectively, and public confidence in the system grew. But this digital leap did not come from expensive international firms or years of bureaucratic contracts. It came from Burkinabé developers, many of them self-taught or trained through local coding programs. They used open-source tools, local servers, and national will to build a system that would have cost other countries millions. What was once only possible with foreign grants and global experts was now a reality driven entirely from within. The advantages of this homegrown digital network extended beyond efficiency. It also brought a new level of accountability. Corruption in public transport, once a shadowy norm in many African cities, suddenly found itself under constant watch. Every fuel charge was logged. Every route was recorded. Ghost buses, siphoned resources, and fake maintenance claims became much harder to hide. The digital system became a quiet enforcer of discipline, not through threats, but through transparency. And perhaps most impressively, the system was scalable. The same platform managing the electric buses could be adapted for taxis, emergency vehicles, school buses, even agricultural machinery. The infrastructure had been laid for a fully integrated transport and mobility grid, something only a handful of African nations had dared to imagine, let alone implement. All of this reshaped how the transport sector operated. Workers became more accountable, citizens became more trusting, and the government, instead of being a passive regulator, became an active architect of innovation. Burkina Faso had not only caught up to the 21st century, in many ways it had leapt ahead. Now other African nations began to take notice. Delegations arrived quietly from neighboring countries, Ghana, Mali, Togo, curious to see if the stories were true. They walked the factory floors. They tested the software. They spoke to the engineers. And many left with a new question in their minds. Could this work at home too? Burkina Faso had done what few thought possible. It had created not just machines, not just solar networks, and not just data platforms. It had created a model, a living proof of concept, a vision that was no longer theoretical. And now the question was no longer can it be done, but who will be next to follow? What do you think? Should more countries develop their own smart transport systems instead of waiting for international support? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you believe in African-built innovation, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. What began as a quiet domestic achievement was no longer confined within Burkina Faso's borders. The electric bus project, once underestimated and unnoticed, had started attracting attention across the continent. What seemed like a local innovation quickly transformed into a potential continental blueprint. Delegations from Ghana, Niger, Mali, and Togo began visiting the UA 2000 industrial complex, not for symbolic diplomacy, but to understand how this technological breakthrough had been achieved without foreign supervision. They walked through the workshops, observed the software interfaces, examined the lithium systems, and spoke directly to the local engineers. What they encountered was not a polished show for foreign guests, but a fully functional, independent system designed entirely on Burkinabé terms. What surprised many wasn't just the physical bus or the solar chargers, but the ecosystem surrounding it. The apps, the predictive maintenance algorithms, the locally run training programs. There were no signs of hidden foreign licensing deals, no visible presence of European or Chinese consultants, and no dependency on external parts. That moment shifted perception. This was not just innovation. This was exportable innovation. For decades, Africa's economic pattern had been brutally predictable. Export raw materials, import finished goods. Cocoa went out, chocolate came in. Oil was shipped, refined fuel returned with markup. But here, for the first time in recent history, a country that once lacked the means to manufacture even small engine parts was now producing complex, intelligent, and sustainable public transport systems. And others wanted in. Orders began trickling in, not only for the buses, but for the entire ecosystem. Countries with aging diesel fleets and collapsing public transport networks saw in Burkina Faso a ready-made solution, created by people who understood the region's climate, its infrastructure challenges, and its economic limits. They didn't just want a bus. They wanted the modular designs, the solar charging stations, the back-end data systems, and the local training modules that could prepare their own youth to maintain and grow such a fleet. This marked a strategic turning point. President Traoré's administration had not merely launched a transport project, they had constructed a platform. One capable of integration, expansion, and licensing across borders. Now, instead of begging for technology transfers from the global north, neighboring countries were requesting blueprints from a fellow African state. And with that, Burkina Faso began to reverse the flow of intellectual property on the continent. The impact extended far beyond industry. For the first time, local youth began reimagining their future. At technical schools across the country, students who once dreamed of working abroad now lined up for placements at the ITA complex. Being part of a homegrown innovation one recognized beyond their borders had become a new source of pride. The project had changed more than infrastructure. It had changed imagination. Because once you build something your neighbors want, you stop seeing yourself as a recipient of development. You become the developer. The economic effects followed. New jobs appeared not only in transport, but in metallurgy, logistics, energy storage, software development, and manufacturing. Solar panel suppliers expanded. Training academies grew. The ecosystem demanded growth, and Burkina Faso's youth was ready. Investment interest grew too. But this time, the nature of the interest was different. It didn't come in the form of aid proposals or donor missions. It came in the form of joint ventures, equity offers, and regional scale-up partnerships. For the first time, financial institutions, including African pension funds, Islamic banks, and Pan-African infrastructure coalitions, began to view Burkina Faso not as a high-risk zone, but as a source of return on innovation. In meetings once dominated by old colonial trade patterns, a new voice was emerging, one that spoke in terms of kilowatt hours, kilometers traveled, and software architecture. That voice was Burkinabé, and it was being heard. The region was shifting. The very idea of what African industrial power could look like was being rewritten, not in Western conference rooms, but on the streets of Ouagadougou, in buses built with local hands, powered by local sun, and coded by local minds. And the rest of Africa was starting to listen. Would you ride a bus built and powered entirely by your country? Do you believe African nations should export their technology instead of raw materials? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe in a self-sufficient Africa driven by its own innovation, be sure to subscribe for what's coming next. By the time regional interest had evolved into formal inquiries and cross-border collaboration talks, it was clear that Burkina Faso's electric bus fleet was no longer just a transportation project. It had become a political, economic, and cultural symbol, proof that African innovation could not only serve its own people, but inspire a continental shift. What began as a local solution was now being viewed as a Pan-African asset. At the heart of this shift was a single truth. The buses were more than vehicles. They were physical representations of sovereignty. For years, the language of African self-determination was reserved for political speeches and academic debates. But here was something you could touch, board, and ride. Here was a product of Pan-African thinking, not written on paper, but rolling through the streets of Ouagadougou. This rising interest came at a time when the African Continental Free Trade Area, or AFCFTA, was struggling to live up to its ambitious promises. One market, one continent, over 1 billion people. But the missing link was always infrastructure. How do you connect producers with buyers when transport is unreliable, expensive, or foreign-owned? Burkina Faso's model quietly offered an answer. With zero-emission buses powered by the sun, supported by intelligent logistics, and maintained through local systems, the vision of AFCFTA suddenly became more real. No tariffs, no fuel dependencies, no customs hurdles, just an African-made solution moving across African cities, built to withstand African roads. Imagine a bus built in Ouagadougou arriving in Lomé, serviced by a mechanic trained in Burkina Faso, tracked by a regional mobile app coded by West African developers, and paid for using a digital currency currently under discussion by the African Union. Every stage of that value chain would belong to Africa. This new model had ripple effects on the global diplomatic stage. For years, Africa has been lectured on climate responsibility while being denied access to clean energy infrastructure. The West demanded emission cuts, yet hesitated to share green technology or cancel harmful debts. Now Burkina Faso's example flips the narrative. A country with limited resources had built a full electric fleet using its own tools and sunlight. In future climate summits, leaders from across the continent could stand beside this example, not as nations asking for help, but as nations offering solutions. It shifted the power dynamic. Those who once dictated climate terms would now face a continent capable of setting its own standards. Battery recycling systems, carbon credits, renewable infrastructure design, all of it could now be led from within. But perhaps the greatest impact was internal. Within Africa itself, Burkina Faso's success challenged the existing power order. In capitals long dominated by foreign-backed projects and donor-funded development strategies, something new was taking shape. The Ouaga 2000 factory became more than a manufacturing site. It became a destination. Reform-minded politicians, tech enthusiasts, and civil society leaders from across Africa began making quiet visits, eager to learn how sovereignty and technology could coexist. They did not come for military training or political alliances. They came to study circuitry, battery storage, software stacks, and solar deployment. Because what they saw was an alternative, a roadmap that replaced slogans with soldering irons, replaced protests with production lines. It suggested that real independence might begin not with declarations, but with design. This shift also began to influence generational dynamics. Young people, long conditioned to equate success with emigration, began reconsidering. In WhatsApp groups and coding forums from Lagos to Lusaka, videos of the dust-colored electric buses navigating through Burkina's capital began to circulate. They sparked not envy, but curiosity. If they could do it, why couldn't we? Hackathon themes started to shift. Instead of mimicking Silicon Valley's latest app craze, developers began exploring hybrid models, combining hardware and software to solve local problems. Whether in agriculture, water management, or rural transport, the spark had been lit. The dream was no longer to leave the continent for opportunity. The dream became building it right here. Still, the challenges ahead were real. Scaling production would test Burkina Faso's ability to manage supply chains, grid stability, and logistics. External pressures would surely grow. Oil lobbies, foreign bus manufacturers, and even neo-colonial financial institutions would attempt to water down, absorb, or dismantle the model. But even if the project stumbled, the idea had already been released into the world. Every African child who had seen a solar-powered bus glide through their city would remember. Every commuter who used an app made by local coders to plan their trip would remember. And that memory would whisper louder than any foreign promise. We can build it ourselves. Do you think youth across Africa should focus more on building than leaving? Should schools teach innovation as a form of independence? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you want to see what happens next in this remarkable story, don't Don't forget to subscribe. The rise of Burkina Faso's electric bus system marks not just a technological milestone, but a psychological revolution across the African continent. It has forced a reassessment of what is possible, of what it means to develop, and of who gets to define the future. In a region too often portrayed through the lens of poverty, conflict, and dependence, a quiet fleet of solar-powered buses has become a signal fire. The lesson is simple but profound. Sovereignty begins with production. The buses themselves, functional and efficient, are only the visible layer. Beneath the surface lies an entirely new philosophy of governance and development. Where foreign aid once dictated the terms of progress, Burkina Faso's model places control back into the hands of its citizens. The manufacturing is local. The energy is local. The software is local. Even the design decisions are based on local experience. Engineers who know the landscape, who understand the rhythm of traffic, who are familiar with the climate and the culture. This localization is not a limitation. It is a superpower. It allows for real efficiency, not theoretical projections. For instance, the battery systems are calibrated for heat resilience. The suspension is adapted for uneven roads, and the user interface is available in local languages. These choices would not make sense in a foreign boardroom, but they make perfect sense in Ouagadougou. This approach also radically changes how infrastructure is funded. Traditionally, African nations were offered loans, sometimes under the label of development assistance, to build roads, ports, and buses. But those loans often came with hidden conditions, external oversight, and cycles of debt that limited real sovereignty. Burkina Faso is proving that it is possible to leap forward without entering that cycle. Internal funds, regional partnerships, and targeted investments are now being used not only to expand production, but to fortify the ecosystem around it. That includes training programs, R&D labs, and even small business support networks designed to supply parts and services to the transport sector. And while critics warn that such a model would be unsustainable, the results tell a different story. Maintenance costs have continued to drop, solar energy savings remain stable, and passenger satisfaction has reached levels never seen under the old diesel fleet. There are fewer breakdowns. There is less noise. The air is cleaner. The roads feel safer. The project has delivered not just movement, but dignity, and that dignity is contagious. The buses are now rolling billboards of a new kind of African pride. They do not shout with noise or exhaust. They glide with confidence. They say to every young mechanic, coder, or planner, "This is what we can build." They say to every skeptical investor, "This is where your money can grow." They say to every foreign partner, "We can do this with or without you." That last message is critical. For too long, Africa has been seen either as a market to be exploited or a problem to be solved. But the electric bus project offers a third identity: Africa as a maker of solutions, on its own terms. That narrative is gaining traction even beyond the continent. Impact investors, green tech firms, and international development circles are now treating Burkina Faso not as a case study, but as a case leader. There are discussions about replication in East African cities like Nairobi and Kampala. There are inquiries from Sahelian neighbors about adopting the training curriculum. And most importantly, there is interest in building long-term African-to-African trade corridors based not on raw exports, but on shared innovation. This is not just economic reform, it is continental realignment. When African nations begin trading intellectual property, not just commodities, they reshape the balance of power. When value creation stays within African borders, the incentive to invest locally grows. And when development is driven by the people it is meant to serve, it becomes more resilient, more honest, and more meaningful. There is still a long road ahead, but the blueprint has been drawn. The factories are operational, the buses are running, and the minds behind them are already thinking of what comes next. Electric cargo vans, mobile health clinics, solar-charged ambulances, data-driven waste management systems, all built from the same belief that solutions made in Africa, for Africa, are not just possible, they are essential. Do you think your city could benefit from such a homegrown transport system? Would you trust a locally built solar vehicle over an imported one? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe in the rise of African innovation, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter in this powerful journey. With every kilometer traveled by Burkina Faso's electric buses, a larger idea is gathering speed, an idea that African nations no longer need to wait, import, or obey the constraints set by others. They can design, build, power, and export their own solutions. The buses are no longer just moving passengers. They are carrying a vision for the continent's future. That vision is already influencing regional cooperation in unexpected ways. For the first time, transportation ministers from neighboring countries are not only meeting at international forums, but are organizing joint workshops in Ouagadougou. Instead of waiting for conferences in Geneva or Washington, they are holding technical demonstrations and field tests on African soil, led by African engineers. The shift is subtle but monumental. It signals a growing confidence that homegrown systems, tailored to the realities of African cities, are not only viable, but preferable. The requests pouring in from other nations are not about borrowing money or asking for aid. They are about accessing knowledge. Technical delegations from Ghana, Senegal, Benin, and Kenya are no longer requesting donations of buses. They are requesting access to design plans, training modules, and software licenses. They want to learn how to replicate the model, but also how to adapt it to their own unique needs. Burkina Faso, once considered too fragile for such a task, is now positioned as a regional center for mobility innovation. The administration is taking steps to institutionalize this new role. Plans are underway to open a Pan-African Transport and Technology Institute, where future engineers, coders, urban planners, and clean energy specialists can be trained using the exact systems that power the Eto'o fleet. This initiative is designed to scale not just production, but human capital. Because the ultimate fuel for any movement isn't solar or electric, it's people. The long-term ambition isn't just to sell buses abroad, it's to build a network of partner countries that can share parts, support one another's fleets, and collaborate on infrastructure. The more this model spreads, the less Africa depends on foreign intermediaries. It also strengthens the case for digital integration. If countries across West Africa adopt similar transport platforms, then they can link systems. Passengers can travel between cities without switching apps. Technicians can work across borders with standardized certifications, and data can be shared to optimize routes, improve safety, and forecast maintenance needs. The foundation for a truly African transport grid is now imaginable, and this technological independence brings with it cultural affirmation. The fact that the buses are designed by Africans, for Africans, and are now desired across the continent is restoring pride in local craftsmanship. For decades, the narrative has been that quality must come from outside, that the best tools are foreign, that the best coders leave. But with each successful rollout of these solar electric buses, that story weakens. It is being replaced by a new narrative, one where African-made no longer means second-rate. It means appropriate, intelligent, and self-determined. This shift in perception is having a quiet but profound effect on how people view governance. The population is starting to see that effective leadership does not need to come with massive PR campaigns or external validation. When a government enables innovation, supports local expertise, and gets out of the way of progress, the results speak for themselves. Trust grows, participation rises, and a shared sense of ownership replaces the old dependency on external donors. Of course, these achievements did not happen in isolation. The success of the buses was made possible by years of investment in education, infrastructure, and patient planning. It was the result of a government willing to take a risk on its people, and of citizens willing to work, learn, and innovate without expecting miracles from outside. It is a reminder that development is not a gift to be received. It is a decision to be made. And Burkina Faso made that decision boldly. Will other nations follow? Can they adapt the model to their own contexts, or will they continue to rely on foreign-built solutions? That remains to be seen. But the possibility now exists, and that is enough to change everything. Do you think Africa is ready to build its own transport grid, designed entirely by its own engineers? Would you like to see a network of solar buses linking major African cities? Share your vision in the comments and subscribe to stay updated on how this revolution unfolds. As Burkina Faso's buses continue their silent journey through city streets and rural routes, another transformation is taking place, one in the minds of young Africans. For the first time in generations, success no longer requires an exit strategy. Until now, the brightest minds across the continent often saw migration as their only path forward. To grow meant to leave. But this project has interrupted that mindset. It has replaced visa dreams with workshop floors. It has replaced the hope of being hired abroad with the determination to create something at home. Across Burkina Faso, engineering programs are now oversubscribed. Young people who once aspired to leave for Europe are now applying to join the ITA development teams. In the workshops of the UA 2000 corridor, former street vendors, secondary school graduates, and self-taught coders are contributing to a national project that has become a regional beacon. Their work is not hidden, it is celebrated. Their innovations are not extracted by others, they are owned and exported. And that shift in ambition is perhaps the most revolutionary outcome of all. The ripple effects are reaching beyond transport. Inspired by the success of the electric fleet, new ventures are springing up around it. Local manufacturers are designing components that complement the buses: lightweight frames, shock-resistant glass, regenerative braking systems. Renewable energy startups are experimenting with more efficient solar converters and lithium recycling facilities. Software developers are building logistics tools, route optimization algorithms, and mobile user interfaces, all in anticipation of a growing African mobility sector. The momentum is real. Even government ministries, once skeptical or slow to adapt, are now aligning policies to support what they see on the ground. There are new grants for clean energy research, tax incentives for electric vehicle parts, and land allocations for infrastructure expansion. Private investors, including African-owned capital firms, are putting money into local transport hubs, battery factories, and clean tech accelerators. They're not investing out of charity. They're investing because Burkina Faso has made this sector bankable. And when something is bankable, it grows. This is changing how Africa is viewed from outside as well. Foreign observers are no longer asking what aid Burkina Faso needs. They're asking what it's selling. Green funds, technology journalists, and international engineers are visiting not to offer help, but to study, to document, and to learn. The country has become not just a recipient of attention, but a source of lessons. And this attention, when grounded in respect, is productive. It opens doors to partnerships built on equality, not hierarchy. The conversations are shifting. Instead of how can we help you modernize, the questions are becoming, can we learn from your model? And how can we collaborate without taking control? This is not to say the work is done. Challenges remain. Raw materials must be sourced sustainably. Power grids still need reinforcement, and geopolitical pressures will always lurk in the background. But even if the electric bus program were to pause tomorrow, its influence would remain, because it has done something deeper than carry passengers. It has carried a message. The message that African cities can be planned, powered, and prospered by African minds. That transportation can be more than functional. It can be symbolic. That progress can come without permission. That the continent has everything it needs to lead, not follow. This is no longer a story about Burkina Faso. It is about what's possible when a nation chooses to invest in itself. It is about the power of ignoring doubt, of trusting local skill, and of building with purpose. And it is only just beginning. If you could change one thing about the way your city moves people, what would it be? What role should youth play in shaping Africa's future mobility? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe now to follow the final part of this story, the ultimate lesson that this journey has revealed. In the quiet hum of Burkina Faso's electric buses, a louder message is rising, one that resonates far beyond the country's borders. It is a question, a challenge, and a vision all at once. If Burkina Faso can do this, why can't we? That simple question, carried not by speeches but by machines in motion, has triggered a wave of reflection across the continent. For decades, Africa has been described in terms of its potential. Potential to develop, potential to modernize, potential to rise. But this story replaces potential with proof. This is not a projection. It is reality. 500 electric buses, powered by the sun, tracked by local software, maintained by local hands, built in local factories, and now requested by other nations. It is the story of a country long labeled as poor, now quietly positioning itself as a producer of pride, technology, and direction. And it is not just symbolic, it is strategic. The buses align perfectly with the African Union's long-term development goals. They offer a real-world demonstration of what the African Continental Free Trade Area could look like in practice. No more waiting for foreign-built systems. No more assembly plants for overseas brands. Here is a ready-made, scalable, sustainable African product that supports intra-African trade, improves public health, reduces emissions, and strengthens education and industry at once. The electric bus is no longer a vehicle. It is a policy platform on wheels. When it rolls into a neighboring capital, it brings with it an invitation. Let us build together. Let us train, code, wire, and weld together. Let us trade value-added goods, not just raw exports. Let us stop exporting opportunity and importing identity. Let us be the architects of our own economies. This is why the story has moved beyond transport. It now lives in conversations about sovereignty, finance, youth empowerment, and climate diplomacy. When Burkina Faso's representatives attend international climate summits, they do so no longer as recipients pleading for adaptation funding, but as leaders showcasing functional mitigation strategies. They come not with charts and promises, but with buses that are already running. And that has power, moral, diplomatic, and economic. In an era where greenwashing is common and promises are often broken, Burkina Faso's model offers something rare: credibility. With this credibility, new doors open. There are early talks of launching a regional carbon credit platform backed by real, measurable reductions in emissions. There are plans to standardize battery recycling protocols across partner nations. Even space technology is now entering the conversation as local institutions explore satellite-based fleet tracking to expand the system's precision. These are not fantasies. They are technical proposals backed by political will, grounded in real infrastructure, and fueled by a generation that believes in the possible. And perhaps most importantly, they are not dependent on the whims of global powers. That ultimately is the revolution, not just electric buses, but independence, not just mobility, but the power to choose a path, the ability to decide what to build, how to build it, and who benefits. For too long, Africa's place in global systems has been as a recipient of models, of technology, of systems invented elsewhere. This project flips that completely. It says to every child watching from the side of a clean, quiet road, we built this, and so can you. If this story has shown anything, it is that real change does not begin in global conferences or diplomatic declarations. It begins when ordinary people are given the tools and trust to do extraordinary things. It begins with the decision to believe in local capacity, to fund talent, to make room for experimentation. It begins not with noise, but with will, and Burkina Faso has proven it. Now the question is, who will follow? Will your country be next? Will your city be next? Will your generation take this blueprint and make it your own? Let us know what you think in the comments. Your voice, your ideas, and your vision matter more than ever. And if you want to stay connected to stories that shift narratives and reveal hidden brilliance across the continent, make sure to subscribe. This journey began with buses, but it ends with belief.